All right, well, I just want to give a greetings on behalf of Community Shares of Greater Cincinnati. We are a fundraising organization for social justice, equity, and environmental causes. And my task today, the planners of this forum asked me to cover a few areas, well, two areas really, human services and education, but I'm going to also cover women's issues, just because I thought, why not? And we happen to be in this moment, actually, right now, of a Supreme Court nomination process where it's given an opportunity for the national conversation to be swirling around women and believing women in the workplace and all those other things. So I thought I'd add that too, just throw that in. So I'm going to just talk for about 5 minutes so we can all get in and then have some good discussion. But my sources are the Ohio Poverty Report from 2018 from Second Harvest. And my second source is a co-authored report from Innovation Ohio's Education Fund and Policy Matters Ohio, titled A Winning Agenda for Ohio's Working Families. Because what I wanted to do is really just lay out what are the key challenges in the areas of human services and education, and then talk about what smart expert folks are talking about of solutions, and then hoping that candidates will pick up on some of these ideas and incorporate them into their runs as candidates. So, human services, cuts for taxes for the wealthiest and large corporations has dominated Ohio policy for years, with disastrous results from one perspective, one would say. Maybe not from the perspective of the very wealthy, but for the rest of us. Lawmakers have cut the income tax by over a third, primarily through tax cuts for the wealthiest Ohioans. This has shrunk the tax base by billions of dollars annually. So the result of that is that the safety net in Ohio has been frayed and has failed to make critical investments in education and training and other things for our statewide economy. State cuts to local governments has also stifled communities' ability to respond to challenges such as that are associated with poverty and addiction. Ohio had the second highest rate in the nation of death by overdose. If you look at our transit, Ohio is almost at the very bottom, the 44th of all 50 states in the nation for funding public transit. And of course, our need for affordable quality childcare and preschool is a key indicator for families' ability to get out of the cycle of poverty, right? So our poverty rates show that the trend is going in the wrong direction. We have 14.8% of Ohioans qualifying as living in poverty, which is under this very low bar, the federal poverty rate, and that is higher than the national rate. Income inequality has worsened as the tax system becomes more regressive, rewarding those at the top while still failing to generate higher wages and better jobs. So nationally, candidates should be sharing with us their positions on the Affordable Care Act, the question of pre-existing conditions. If children will lose their health care due to cuts in CHIP, which is the Children's Health Insurance Program, cuts to federally qualified health centers, of which Southwest Ohio is able to provide public health, food stamps, and that's just to name a few major programs. If we can cut these ineffective special interest tax breaks and get the wealthiest to pay their fair share, this would allow us to once again support needed investments in Ohio's classrooms and workplaces and communities. So that's just a general perspective on human services in Ohio and what we hope candidates can be talking about. I'll shift to education quickly as my second point, and I just want to draw attention to this report, Confronting the Education Debt. It's a national report just released that looks at the national data of federal funding for Title I and IDEA. Title I funds low-income children in schools of low-income communities. IDEA funds services for children with disabilities. We have underfunded these two federal programs to the tune of $580 billion just in the past 13 years. While over the same time period, the personal net worth of the nation's wealthiest 400 people grew by $1.5 trillion. The recommendations in this report suggest some solutions. We can rescind the 2017 tax code, which overwhelmingly favors the top 1%. We can close the federal carried interest loophole. We can reduce corporate tax breaks, which is about $181 billion annually, just in tax breaks for corporations. We can hold school funding immune from business subsidies and economic development project subsidies, which we're talking about actually locally with a Fair Funding Now campaign around the use of tax abatements and how that relates to school funding. We could also put a moratorium on the federal charter schools program, freeing up $500 million annually, which could be diverted to the creation of sustainable community learning center schools like the ones we have in Cincinnati, and that's just a few solutions. So if you're interested in, and we are, in education, and we've heard a lot about education, but really just limited to the ECOT scandal, there's so much more that we really need to be asking our candidates and our electeds to really do for public education. There is a lot to be done. And finally, to close out, I'll talk about issues of women. And of course, we always say all issues is a women's issue because women are human and all issues affect us. But in this election cycle, there's certainly some concrete policy matters, namely the key issues: women's health care, access to birth control, reproductive freedoms, and pay equality, and also the Violence Against Women's Act, which continues to be debated and yet provides important funding for various community programs. For example, community violence prevention programs, protections for victims who are evicted from their homes due to events related to domestic violence and stalking, funding for victim assistance services like rape crisis centers and hotlines, and the list goes on. So a very important federal policy. And so those are just a few matters that we as voters would like to hear from our candidates as they run statewide and for our congressional candidates. If you are concerned about human services, education, and women. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.